The champagne fountain sparkled under the crystal chandelier at the Montgomery Towers penthouse ballroom. Blake Montgomery adjusted his Rolex and surveyed the crowd of Seattle's elite, gathered for his company's annual charity gala. At 30 years old, he had everything a man could want: a billion-dollar tech empire, a penthouse overlooking Puget Sound and Vanessa Price, a supermodel girlfriend who looked perfect on his arm. "Darling, stop looking so bored," Vanessa purred, sliding her perfectly manicured hand through his arm. Her silver dress clung to her like a second skin, designed to turn heads. "This is your event. At least pretend you care about whatever cause we're supporting this year." "Youth education initiatives," Blake replied automatically, though his mind was elsewhere. Something felt hollow tonight, like every night lately. Success had become predictable. Relationships felt transactional, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something essential was missing from his carefully constructed life. Tyler Martinez, his business partner and closest friend since college, appeared beside them with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. "You look like you'd rather be debugging code than schmoozing with donors. What's wrong?" "Nothing," Blake lied smoothly. "Just thinking about the quarterly projections," Liar Tyler said with a knowing grin. "But I'll let it slide because I need to introduce you to someone. We just signed a massive deal with a Parisian fashion tech firm. Their consultant is here tonight, and trust me, you'll want to meet her. She's brilliant, and she's revolutionizing how fashion brands use AI for sustainable practices." Vanessa's grip on Blake's arm tightened imperceptibly. A fashion consultant. How quaint. "I'm sure Blake has more important people to meet. Actually, this could open doors in the European market we've been trying to crack," Blake said, his business instincts kicking in. "Where is she?" Tyler gestured toward the balcony. "She stepped out for air. Said something about Seattle being more beautiful than she remembered." The comment struck Blake as odd, but he followed Tyler's direction, leaving Vanessa behind despite her protests. As he walked through the crowd, fragments of conversation washed over him. People discussing stock prices, vacation homes, who was dating whom. The same shallow topics that filled every event he attended. The balcony was quieter, cooler. The night air carried the scent of salt water from the sound below. A woman stood at the railing, her back to him. She wore an emerald green dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. Her dark hair cascaded down her back in loose waves, and something about her posture suggested confidence mixed with contemplation. "Excuse me," Blake said, approaching slowly. "Tyler mentioned you were out here. I'm Blake Montgomery." The woman turned, and Blake felt the air leave his lungs. She was stunning in a way that transcended conventional beauty. Her warm brown eyes held depth and intelligence. Her smile was genuine, but guarded. There was something familiar about her, like a melody he couldn't quite place. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice smooth with a slight French accent that hadn't been there before. "I've heard a great deal about you." "Emma Clark, consultant for Russo Fashion Technologies." She extended her hand, and Blake shook it, noting the firmness of her grip. The calluses that suggested she worked with her hands despite her polished appearance. "Emma Clark," he repeated, the name triggering something in his memory, but the connection remained elusive. "Tyler says you're doing innovative work with sustainable fashion." "I try to make a difference where I can," Emma replied, releasing his hand and turning back to the view. "This city has changed so much. When I left 8 years ago, this building didn't even exist." "You're from Seattle originally?" Blake moved to stand beside her at the railing, genuinely curious now. "Lived here my whole childhood," Emma said, her tone carefully neutral. "Moved to Paris for university and ended up staying. But Seattle will always be home, in a way." Blake studied her profile, that nagging sense of recognition growing stronger. "Where did you go to school here? Maybe we crossed paths." Emma's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "West Shore Academy. I doubt you'd remember me, though. I wasn't exactly memorable back then." West Shore Academy. Blake had graduated from there 12 years ago. He tried to place her, running through memories of classmates, but came up empty. "When did you graduate?" "The same year as you, actually. Class of 2013. Emma's voice remained even, but something flickered in her eyes. But like I said, we moved in different circles. Before Blake could respond, Vanessa's voice cut through the moment like a knife. There you are, Blake. I've been looking everywhere. She swept onto the balcony, assessing Emma with the kind of calculating look she usually reserved for rival models. And who is this? Emma Clark. This is Vanessa Price. Blake made the introduction reluctantly. Emma's the consultant Tyler mentioned. Charmed, Vanessa said without warmth. She positioned herself between Blake and Emma, a territorial move that wasn't lost on anyone. Blake and I were just about to do the opening remarks. You know how important the first impression is at these events? Of course, Emma said graciously, but Blake caught the flicker of amusement in her eyes. I should mingle anyway. Mr. Montgomery, we can discuss the collaboration details next week. Tyler has my contact information. As Emma moved past them to return inside, Blake caught a hint of her perfume. Something with vanilla and amber, unexpectedly warm and familiar. He watched her disappear into the crowd, that puzzle piece of memory still refusing to fall into place. She's pretty, Vanessa said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. In an ordinary sort of way. Very girl next door. She seems intelligent, Blake replied, distracted. And if Tyler's excited about the partnership, it must be worthwhile. The evening progressed with the usual parade of speeches, silent auction announcements, and networking. But Blake found his attention repeatedly drawn to Emma. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, engaging in conversations that seemed genuine rather than performative. She laughed at something an older gentleman said, the sound bright and unforced. She listened intently when others spoke, asked thoughtful questions, remembered names. It was Tyler who finally provided the missing piece. He found Blake at the bar, watching Emma from across the room. Gosh, you're staring, Tyler observed. Vanessa noticed, by the way. She's been shooting daggers in Emma's direction all night. There's something familiar about her, Blake admitted. She said we went to school together, but I can't place her. Tyler's expression shifted, becoming more serious. That's because she looked completely different back then. Emma Clark used to be Emma Clark Morrison. She went by her full name in high school. The name hit Blake like a physical blow. Emma Clark Morrison. The quiet, overweight girl who'd lived next door to his family's estate. The one who'd always hidden behind oversized hoodies and books. The girl whose mother worked as their housekeeper. The girl he'd barely noticed, except to avoid being seen with her at school events, and then he remembered the graduation party. The moment that made his stomach turn with sudden, sickening clarity, it had been at Tyler's parents' beach house. Blake had been drinking, showing off for his friends, including Vanessa, who'd been his girlfriend even then. Emma had been there because her mother was catering the event. She'd been standing near the kitchen entrance, probably helping her mother. When Blake's friend Carson had made a cruel comment about her appearance, Blake had laughed. Worse than that, he'd added his own comment. Something about how she should stick to the shadows where she belonged. That someone who looked like her shouldn't embarrass herself by trying to fit in with them. He'd been trying to impress his friends, to seem cool and untouchable. He'd never forgotten the look on Emma's face when she'd turned and met his eyes. She'd heard everything. That expression of hurt and betrayal had haunted him in unguarded moments over the years. But he'd pushed it away, told himself it was just teenage stupidity. That everyone was cruel at that age. She heard me, Blake said quietly. More to himself than to Tyler. That night at your graduation party, I said terrible things about her, and she heard every word. Tyler nodded solemnly. Her mother quit working for your family the next week. Emma left for Paris 2 months later. From what I understand, she put herself through school, worked 3 jobs, and built her career from nothing. She's kind of a legend in sustainable fashion circles now. And she's done all this while funding scholarships for underprivileged kids through a foundation she started. Blake felt sick. The woman across the room, poised and confident and successful, had built herself up from the ruins of the person he'd helped tear down. And now she was here, in his building, at his event. Looking at him with those guarded eyes that held secrets, he was only beginning to understand. I need to talk to her, Blake said. Already moving. Maybe give it some thought first, Tyler advised, catching his arm. Emma's professional. She'll work with your company because it's good business. But you don't get to demand her forgiveness just because you finally feel guilty. Blake stopped, the wisdom of Tyler's words sinking in. But across the room, Emma glanced in his direction. For just a moment, their eyes met. In that brief connection, Blake saw it all. Recognition, wariness, and something else that might have been sadness or might have been resolved. Emma raised her champagne glass in a small, ironic toast before turning away to continue her conversation. The gesture was elegant, controlled, and absolutely devastating in its implications. She remembered everything, and she'd come back anyway, transformed and successful, ready to work with him despite their history. Blake realized with startling clarity that the hollow feeling he'd been carrying wasn't about success or wealth or his relationship with Vanessa. It was about unfinished business. It's about bridges he'd burned without even realizing they'd mattered. About a girl he'd barely noticed who'd apparently been worth noticing all along. The question was whether Emma Clark would give him any chance at all to prove he'd changed, or if she'd simply maintain her professional distance, take what she needed from their business arrangement, and disappear from his life as thoroughly as she had 8 years ago. Looking at her now, confident and self-contained, and utterly out of his reach despite being in the same room, Blake suspected he already knew the answer. But for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him that wasn't boredom or restlessness. It was the uncomfortable, urgent need to become someone worthy of a second chance he probably didn't deserve. The Seattle rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Montgomery Tech's conference room. Emma sat across from Blake, a sleek laptop open between them, discussing integration strategies for their joint venture. 3 weeks had passed since the gala, and they'd maintained a carefully professional relationship. That left Blake feeling increasingly frustrated. Preliminary data shows user engagement increases by 43% when we implement the virtual fitting room feature, Emma explained, her finger tracing graphs on the screen. She wore a navy business suit that somehow made her look both authoritative and untouchable. If we launch in Q2, we'll capture the summer fashion cycle. Blake nodded, but he was barely listening to the business details. Instead, he watched the way Emma's expression remained neutral. The way she never quite met his eyes for more than a second, the invisible wall she'd constructed between them. "Emma, can we talk about something other than algorithms for a minute?" "We're here to discuss business, Mr. Montgomery," she replied coolly, though her fingers stilled on the keyboard. "Blake," he corrected for the 100th time. "And I know we're supposed to be discussing business, but I need to address what happened at West Shore." "What I said at that graduation party?" Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was 12 years ago. Water under the bridge?" "It's not, though," Blake insisted, leaning forward. "I was cruel. I said things that were unforgivable, and you heard them. I've spent the last 3 weeks remembering details I'd conveniently forgotten. I was a spoiled, arrogant kid who thought being popular meant tearing other people down." "You're right. You were all of those things." Emma finally looked directly at him, and the intensity in her brown eyes made his breath catch. "But I didn't come back to Seattle for an apology, Blake. I came back because this partnership makes business sense. Your technology combined with our fashion expertise creates something revolutionary. That's what matters." "Does it bother you?" Blake asked quietly. "Working with me, I mean?" "Knowing what I did?" Emma was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the laptop screen. "Do you want the truth or the polite answer?" "The truth. Always the truth." "Yes," she admitted, her voice softer now. "It bothers me. Every time I walk into this building, I remember the girl I used to be. The one who wore her mother's hand-me-downs because we couldn't afford new clothes. The one who brought lunch from home while you and your friends bought whatever you wanted from the cafeteria. The one who was invisible until she became a target for your entertainment." The words landed like physical blows. Blake felt heat rising in his face, a mixture of shame and something else he couldn't quite name. "Emma, I can't change the past. But I'm not that person anymore, aren't you?" She closed the laptop with a decisive click. "You're still the heir to a fortune. You still date supermodels. You still live in that world where everything comes easily because of who you are, not what you've earned." "That's not fair," Blake protested, though part of him wondered if she was right. "Heir?" Emma's laugh was hollow. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what happened after your graduation party. My mother came home that night and found me crying in my room. I told her what you'd said, how everyone had laughed. The next day, she gave your family 2 weeks' notice. We moved to a smaller apartment across town. She worked herself to exhaustion at 2 different jobs to help me save money for Paris. Blake felt his throat constrict. I never knew she quit because of me. Why would you? We were just the help. Forgettable. Replaceable. Emma stood, gathering her things. I built myself from nothing, Blake. Every success I've had, I earned. Nobody handed me connections or startup capital or second chances. So forgive me if I'm not interested in absolving your guilt. She was halfway to the door when Blake found his voice. You're right about everything. I was handed advantages I didn't appreciate. I hurt people without thinking about the consequences. But Emma, please don't leave. Not like this. Emma paused, her hand on the door handle, her back to him. This meeting is over. We'll continue our discussion next week. I broke up with Vanessa, Blake said suddenly, desperately. 2 days after the gala, Emma turned slowly, surprise flickering across her features before she controlled it. That's none of my business. She said terrible things about you that night after you left. Called you ordinary and forgettable. Said you were probably only successful because you'd slept with the right people in Paris. Blake stood, moving closer, but maintaining respectful distance. I defended you. We had a massive fight. I realized I couldn't be with someone who saw other people that way, who saw you that way. So you want credit for basic human decency? Emma's tone was sharp, but Blake caught the slight tremor in her voice. No, I'm just trying to show you that I'm trying to change, to be better. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for the chance to prove I'm not the person I was at 18. Emma studied him for a long moment, emotions warring across her face. Finally, she said, My mother always told me that people don't really change. They just get better at hiding who they are. Prove her wrong, Blake, but do it through actions, not words. After she left, Blake stood alone in the conference room, rain continuing its relentless percussion against the windows. Tyler found him there 20 minutes later, staring at nothing. That looked intense, Tyler observed, settling into one of the leather chairs. Emma practically ran past me in the hallway. She looked upset. I told her about breaking up with Vanessa, Blake admitted. I thought it might show her I'm trying to change. Tyler shook his head. Blake, breaking up with your superficial girlfriend isn't some grand gesture. It's just you finally developing standards. If you want Emma to believe you've changed, you need to do something that actually matters. Like what? That's something you need to figure out yourself, Tyler said. But here's a thought. Stop trying to prove something to Emma and start actually being different. What do you care about besides money and success? What would you fight for if there was no benefit to yourself? The question haunted Blake over the following days. He found himself researching Emma's charity foundation, learning about the scholarships she'd established for underprivileged students pursuing fashion and design. She'd helped dozens of young people escape the same circumstances she'd grown up in, all while building her own career. He attended a fundraiser for Seattle youth programs that Emma was scheduled to speak at. Sitting in the back row where she wouldn't notice him, her speech was passionate and personal, discussing the importance of giving opportunities to those who society overlooked. She spoke about being underestimated, about turning pain into purpose, about believing in yourself when nobody else did. Blake left before the reception, something uncomfortable and urgent growing in his chest. He'd spent his entire adult life pursuing success, but what had he actually contributed to the world beyond profits and stock prices? The next morning, he called an emergency meeting with the Montgomery Foundation board. His father, Richard Montgomery, raised an eyebrow when Blake outlined his proposal. You want to donate $5 million to establish a joint scholarship program with Emma Clark's foundation? Richard's tone was skeptical. Son, is this about business or about impressing a woman? It's about doing something meaningful, Blake replied firmly. Emma's foundation changes lives, but they're limited by funding. We have resources sitting in accounts that could be helping kids who need it. Kids like Emma was. The fact that this connects you to Miss Clark is purely coincidental. Richard's expression was knowing. Blake met his father's gaze directly. I'm not trying to buy her affection, Dad. I'm trying to support something that matters. Something she built because it's the right thing to do. Whether she ever forgives me or not, these kids will benefit. That's what's important. Richard studied his son for a long moment before nodding slowly. You sound different, more thoughtful. This Emma Clark must be quite remarkable. She is, Blake agreed quietly. She's everything I never bothered to notice when it mattered. When Emma received the formal proposal from Montgomery Foundation 3 days later, she called Blake immediately. He could hear the confusion and suspicion in her voice. What is this? She demanded without preamble. $5 million for a joint scholarship program. Blake, what are you playing at? It's not a game, he assured her. Your foundation does important work. You help kids who remind me of who you were, who I should have seen and appreciated. This isn't about us. It's about them. It's always an angle with people like you, Emma said, though her tone had softened slightly. What do you want in return? Nothing. The foundation maintains complete autonomy over selection and distribution. Montgomery Tech's name appears alongside yours as a sponsor, but you have final say on everything. No strings attached. Emma was silent for so long Blake thought she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. Do you have any idea how many students this could help? How many lives this could change? That's the point, Blake said simply. Say yes, Emma. Let me do this one thing right. Another long pause. Then I need to think about it. This is a major decision. Take all the time you need, Blake replied, though his heart was pounding. The offer stands regardless of anything else between us. 2 weeks later, Emma agreed to a meeting at a coffee shop in Pike Place Market, neutral territory away from offices and corporate environments. Blake arrived early, nerves making his hands unsteady as he ordered coffee. Emma appeared exactly on time, wearing jeans and a simple sweater that made her look younger. More like the girl he vaguely remembered from school. She slid into the seat across from him, declining his offer to buy her coffee. I've reviewed the proposal with my board, she began without preamble. The terms are more than generous. Almost suspiciously so. No suspicion needed, Blake said. I meant what I said. No strings. Emma wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup, studying him intently. Why are you really doing this, Blake? And I want the truth, not some corporate philanthropy speech. Blake took a breath, choosing his words carefully. Because when I look at what you've built, at the lives you've changed, I realize I've been wasting my advantages. I've been successful in business, but I haven't done anything that actually matters. You've spent years helping people whose society overlooks the same way you were overlooked. I want to be part of that. Not to impress you, not to earn forgiveness, but because it's right. Emma's expression softened fractionally. You really mean that? I do, Blake confirmed. And Emma, I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day in the conference room. You were right about me. I have lived in a bubble of privilege, never questioning whether I deserved what I had. But I'm questioning it now. I'm trying to figure out who I am when I strip away the money and the name and the easy advantages. And who are you? Emma asked quietly. I don't know yet, Blake admitted. But I want to find out. And I think maybe you could help me understand what it means to actually earn something instead of just having it given to you. For the first time since their reunion, Emma smiled at him, genuinely smiled, and Blake felt something shift in his chest. You know what the hardest part of coming back to Seattle was? She said, it wasn't facing you or dealing with old memories. It was realizing that part of me never stopped being that insecure girl who wanted Blake Montgomery to notice her, to think she mattered. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Blake reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he covered her hand with his. You matter, Emma. You've always mattered. I was just too blind and stupid to see it. Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I can't just forgive you, Blake. It's not that simple. I know, he said softly, and I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking for the chance to show you that some people can change, that your mother wasn't entirely right about everyone. Emma turned her hand over, lacing her fingers tentatively with his. The gesture was small, but monumental, a crack in the armor she'd worn since her return. "One chance," she whispered. "But Blake, if you hurt me again, there won't be a third act. I've worked too hard to build myself up to let anyone tear me down again." "I won't hurt you," Blake promised, knowing even as he said it that he would spend every day trying to live up to those words. "I swear, Emma, never again." They sat in the coffee shop as the afternoon faded to evening, talking about everything and nothing. Emma told stories about her early days in Paris, about the loneliness and determination that had driven her. Blake shared his own struggles with living up to his father's expectations, with feeling like success meant nothing if it didn't come from his own efforts. When they finally left, walking side by side through the wet streets of Seattle, something had fundamentally shifted between them. They weren't quite friends, weren't quite more than that, but they'd found a tentative bridge across the chasm of their history. Blake walked Emma to her car, reluctant to let the evening end. As she unlocked the door, she turned to face him, standing close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the scholarship program, for listening, for trying. It means more than you know." "Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve," Blake replied. Emma rose on her toes and pressed a brief, soft kiss to his cheek. The gesture was over before Blake could fully process it, but the warmth of her lips lingered on his skin. "Good night." "Blake," she said, sliding into her car, as he watched her drive away. Blake touched his cheek where she'd kissed him, a smile spreading across his face. It wasn't forgiveness yet, wasn't absolution for his past mistakes, but it was possibility. Tentative and fragile and more valuable than anything else in his life. For the first time since Emma had walked back into his world, Blake felt something beyond guilt and regret. He felt hope. The scholarship announcement event was scheduled for a crisp Saturday morning at the Seattle Community Center. Emma had insisted on hosting it in the neighborhood where she'd grown up, rather than at some fancy downtown venue. Blake arrived early to help with setup. Wearing jeans and a casual shirt instead of his usual designer suits. "You actually showed up," Emma said with surprise when she saw him carrying folding chairs from the storage room. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore paint-stained jeans and an old Sorbonne sweatshirt. She looked more relaxed than Blake had ever seen her. "I said I would," Blake replied, setting down the chairs. "Where do you want these?" Over the next hour, they worked side by side, setting up the space, hanging banners, arranging refreshments. Tyler arrived with Grace Clark, Emma's mother, who'd insisted on helping despite Emma's protests. When Grace saw Blake, her expression hardened. "Mrs. Clark," Blake said, approaching her respectfully. "Thank you for coming." Grace studied him with the same penetrating gaze her daughter possessed. "My Emma says you've changed." I told her people don't change, they just get better at pretending. "Mom," Emma interjected, embarrassed. "No, she's right to be skeptical," Blake said, meeting Grace's eyes directly. "I was terrible to your daughter. I said things that were cruel and unforgivable. I let her be treated badly and did nothing to stop it. I don't expect you to believe I've changed based on my words, but I hope over time my actions will speak for themselves." Grace continued to assess him for a long moment before nodding curtly. "We'll see. But Blake Montgomery, if you hurt my daughter again, fortune or no fortune, you'll answer to me." "Yes, ma'am," Blake said sincerely. "That's fair." As Grace moved away to help Tyler with the banner, Emma touched Blake's arm gently. "She likes you. If she truly hated you, she would have ignored you completely." "That's her version of liking someone?" Blake asked with a weak smile. "For someone who hurt her daughter, yes," Emma confirmed. "It's progress." The event was a success beyond expectations. 50 students from underprivileged backgrounds attended, each having been selected for the first round of scholarships. Blake watched as Emma spoke with each one individually, learning their stories, their dreams, their struggles. She remembered every name, every detail, giving each young person her complete attention. A girl named Jennifer, 17 with dreams of becoming a fashion designer, reminded Blake painfully of what Emma must have been like at that age. Shy, uncertain, but with a fierce determination burning in her eyes. "Miss Clark changed my life," Jennifer told Blake when he asked about her application. She saw my portfolio on social media and reached out personally. She told me I had talent, that I deserved opportunities. Nobody had ever said that to me before. Blake felt his throat tighten. This was what Emma had been doing while he'd been focused on profit margins and stock prices. She'd been finding overlooked kids and giving them hope. After the formal presentations concluded, Emma found Blake standing alone by the windows, watching the students and their families mingle excitedly. "Thank you for this," she said softly, standing beside him. "You've made a real difference today." "You made the difference," Blake corrected. "I just provided money. You provided the vision, the connection, the heart." Emma was quiet for a moment, her shoulder brushing his. "I misjudged you a little. Not completely, but a little. You could have just written a check and walked away. Instead, you're here, really here, seeing why this matters. It's easy to see when you care about the person showing you," Blake said, then caught himself. "I mean, when someone explains it so clearly." Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You can admit you care about me, Blake. I won't bite." "I care about you," Blake said immediately, turning to face her fully. "I care about you more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. Maybe ever. And it terrifies me, because I know how badly I messed up before, and I'm terrified I'll mess up again." "Blake," Emma began, but was interrupted by Tyler's loud voice. "Emma, Blake, we have a problem." They turned to find Tyler's expression grim, his phone in his hand. "Vanessa just posted something on social media. It's going viral." Blake's stomach dropped. He took the phone Tyler offered and read the post, his blood running cold. Exposing the truth about Seattle's newest philanthropist. The post began, accompanied by a photo of Emma from high school. Looking exactly as Blake remembered, overweight, awkward, wearing that yellow dress with the stain she'd mentioned. Emma Clark pretends to care about underprivileged youth. But really, she's just a gold digger who transformed herself to trap rich men. Ask Blake Montgomery how she accidentally reconnected with him after becoming thin and pretty. Hashtag fake people, hashtag gold digger, hashtag Seattle scandal. The post already had thousands of shares and comments, most of them cruel. People Blake had considered friends were liking and adding their own speculations. Emma's face had gone completely white. She grabbed the phone, reading rapidly, her hands beginning to shake. "How did she get this photo?" "This was from the graduation party," Blake finished grimly. "Vanessa must have saved it all these years. Why would she do this?" Emma's voice was barely audible. "We barely interacted. What did I do to her?" "You existed," Blake said bitterly. "You're everything she's not. Genuine, accomplished, kind. And she can't stand that I chose you over her." "You didn't choose me," Emma corrected, scrolling through the vicious comments. People were dissecting her appearance, questioning her motives, suggesting she'd orchestrated the entire scholarship program as a publicity stunt. "We're not even together." Blake took the phone from her gently and handed it back to Tyler. Then he took both of Emma's hands in his. "I'm choosing you now," he said firmly. "Emma, I don't care what Vanessa posts or what people say. Everyone who matters knows the truth about who you are and what you've built." "But the foundation," Emma protested, tears gathering in her eyes. "This could destroy everything I've worked for. People will think I'm a fraud, and we fight back," Blake said. "Not with social media posts, but with truth. Let me handle this." "Blake, no," Emma said quickly. "Getting into a public fight with your ex will only make things worse. I'll issue a statement. I'll weather this." "I've dealt with worse. You shouldn't have to," Blake insisted. He turned to Tyler. "Get our PR team on this immediately. I want a full press conference scheduled for tomorrow. And Tyler, call our lawyers. I want to know if what Vanessa did constitutes defamation." Grace had appeared during the conversation, her expression fierce. That horrible woman. "Emma, baby, don't you let her take this from you." But Emma was already retreating into herself. Blake could see it happening. The confident woman he'd been getting to know was disappearing behind walls of self-protection. "I need some air," she said, pulling away from Blake. "Excuse me." She disappeared into the hallway before anyone could stop her. Blake moved to follow, but Grace caught his arm. "Give her a minute," Grace advised. "When Emma gets hurt, She needs time to process before she can talk. It's been that way since she was little. I should have anticipated this, Blake said angrily. I should have known Vanessa would try something. You can't protect her from everything, Grace said, though her tone had softened. But you can stand beside her when the storms come. That's what matters. Blake found Emma 15 minutes later in an empty classroom down the hall. She sat at one of the small desks, looking absurdly out of place in the child-sized furniture, staring at nothing. I was stupid to think I could come back here, Emma said, without looking at him. That I could face my past and not have it destroy everything I built. Blake pulled up another tiny desk and sat beside her, their knees nearly touching in the cramped space. Vanessa is just one bitter person with a social media account. She doesn't get to define you, but she found my weakness, Emma said, finally meeting his gaze. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her voice was steady. Deep down, I'm still that insecure girl who felt worthless because of how she looked. Seeing that photo, seeing people tear apart how I used to look and suggest I only matter now because I got thin and pretty, it confirms every fear I've carried for years. You were never worthless, Blake said intensely. Emma, I was blind and cruel, but even then, you had value I was too stupid to see. You were smart and kind and determined. Those qualities didn't change when your appearance did. They were always there. Then why didn't you see them? Emma's question was soft, but devastating. Why did it take me transforming into someone conventionally attractive for you to notice I existed? Blake had no good answer for that, because she was right. He wouldn't have looked twice at Emma if she'd returned to Seattle looking the way she had in high school. The realization made him sick. I can't change who I was, he said finally. I can only show you who I'm trying to become. And Emma, the person I'm trying to become, sees value in people regardless of how they look. You've taught me that over these past weeks. Every student you've helped, every person you've treated with genuine kindness, you've shown me what really matters. Emma wiped her tears, a sad smile crossing her face. You know what the worst part is? Part of me still cares what you think. Part of me still wants Blake Montgomery's approval, even knowing how much that boy hurt me. How pathetic is that? It's not pathetic, Blake said, reaching for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. It's human. We can't always control what we feel, only what we do about it. They sat in silence for several minutes, hands clasped, processing everything that had happened. Finally, Emma spoke again. What do you suggest we do about Vanessa's post? Tell the truth, Blake said simply. All of it. The good, the bad, the ugly. We hold a press conference tomorrow. I'll admit publicly what I did at that graduation party, how I treated you, how wrong I was. You'll tell your story about building yourself from nothing, about why this foundation matters. We'll show people who you really are, not the caricature Vanessa's trying to create. Blake, if you admit what you said about me, it will hurt your reputation too, Emma warned. People will judge you, good Blake said firmly. I should be judged for it. I've hidden from the consequences of my actions for too long. It's time to own them. Emma studied him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You've really changed, haven't you? The Blake I knew in high school would never have admitted fault publicly. The Blake you knew in high school was a coward who cared more about looking good than being good, he replied. I'm trying to be different. You're helping me be different. Emma squeezed his hand. Okay, we'll do the press conference. Together. The next day, Blake and Emma stood side by side in front of a crowd of reporters at Montgomery Tech headquarters. Vanessa's post had exploded overnight, becoming a trending topic across multiple platforms. The story had everything people loved: wealth, scandal, transformation, romance. Blake stepped up to the microphone first, his heart pounding but his voice steady. Thank you all for coming. I'm sure you've seen the social media posts about Emma Clark and our relationship. I'm here to address them, but not in the way you might expect. He took a breath, finding Emma's eyes in the crowd. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. 12 years ago at a graduation party, I said terrible things about Emma. I mocked her appearance. I treated her as if she was invisible, worthless, beneath notice. I said these things to impress my friends, to seem cool and untouchable. Emma overheard every word. Murmur ran through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Blake pushed forward. The girl I mocked went on to put herself through university while working 3 jobs. She built a successful career in sustainable fashion. She established a foundation that has helped hundreds of underprivileged students pursue their dreams. She did all of this without any help from people like me, despite being overlooked and underestimated at every turn. Blake's voice grew stronger, more passionate. When Emma returned to Seattle and I didn't recognize her, it wasn't because she'd physically transformed. It was because I'd never really looked at her in the first place. I'd judged her by the most superficial criteria and dismissed her entirely. That failure of character was mine, not hers. He paused, letting the words sink in. The scholarship program we announced yesterday represents my attempt to support the kind of work Emma has been doing for years. Giving opportunities to people who society overlooks, it's not about romance or manipulation or gold digging. It's about recognizing value where others see none. Emma taught me that lesson, though I was a slow learner. Blake stepped back, and Emma moved to the microphone. She looked nervous but determined, wearing a simple dress that somehow made her look both powerful and vulnerable. "Thank you, Blake," she began. "I want to address the photo that's been circulating. Yes, that was me in high school. I was overweight, awkward, and insecure. I wore my mother's old clothes because we couldn't afford new ones. I was invisible to most of my classmates, and when I wasn't invisible, I was a target." Her voice wavered slightly, but she continued. "When I went to Paris, I had 2 choices. Let my past define me, or build something new. I chose to build. I lost weight because I started running to deal with stress. I learned about fashion because it was my passion and my career path. I became confident because I had to be to survive in a foreign country with no safety net." Emma's eyes swept across the crowd. "The suggestion that I transformed myself to trap a wealthy man is insulting. It's not just to me, but to every woman who has worked hard to overcome difficult circumstances. I built my career through talent and determination. My foundation exists because I remember what it felt like to be overlooked, and I never want another kid to feel that way." She turned to look at Blake, standing just behind her. "As for Blake Montgomery, yes, he hurt me deeply when we were young. Yes, I carried that pain for years. But I came back to Seattle for business reasons, not revenge or romance. What's developed between us since has been unexpected." Emma faced the cameras again. "Blake and I are navigating a complicated history. He's trying to be better than he was. I'm trying to trust again. Whether that leads somewhere or not, I don't know. But I won't let anyone reduce my accomplishments to my appearance or suggest that my value depends on having a wealthy man's approval." The press conference continued with questions, some sympathetic, others hostile. Blake and Emma answered them together, presenting a united front. When a reporter asked if they were dating, Blake surprised everyone, including Emma. "I'd like to be," he said honestly. "Emma is the most remarkable person I've ever met. But that's her decision to make, not mine. What I can tell you is that I'm committed to supporting her work regardless of whether she wants a personal relationship with me." Emma's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "Blake and I are still figuring things out," she said diplomatically. "What matters most right now is the scholarship program and the students it will help." After the press conference, they retreated to Blake's office, both exhausted. Tyler had stayed behind to handle follow-up questions from reporters. "You didn't have to say all that," Emma said, collapsing into one of Blake's leather chairs. "About wanting to date me. It's true," Blake said simply. "And I'm done hiding how I feel or saying things I don't mean to protect my image. Emma, these past weeks with you have been the most genuine connection I've had with anyone in years. Maybe ever." Emma was quiet, processing. Finally, she stood and crossed to where Blake stood by the windows. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that if I let myself care about you, you'll hurt me again. Scared that I'm making the same mistake of wanting something from Blake Montgomery that he can't give." "What do you want from me?" Blake asked softly. "I want you to see me," Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. "Really see me, not just the polished version I present now. See the parts that are still insecure and wounded and uncertain, and still choose to stay." Blake cupped her face gently in his hands. "Emma, I see you. I see how strong you are, but also how much courage it takes for you to be vulnerable. I see your kindness, your brilliance, your determination. I see the girl you were and the woman you've become, and I'm in awe of both." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "I'm terrified of believing you, and let me prove it," Blake whispered. "Not through grand gestures or public declarations, through everyday choices, through showing up, listening, supporting your dreams, being worthy of your trust." Emma searched his face, looking for any hint of insincerity. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was different from the brief kiss on the cheek she'd given him weeks ago. This was deep, honest, full of all the complicated emotions between them: pain and hope, fear and possibility, endings and beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know if I can completely forgive what you did," Emma said honestly. "That pain is part of who I became. But Blake, I can try. I can give us a chance to build something new. That's all I'm asking for," Blake replied. "A chance. I'll spend every day trying to deserve it." Over the following months, Blake proved true to his word. He showed up at foundation events, not as a donor seeking recognition, but as a volunteer willing to do whatever was needed. He got to know the scholarship recipients, learned their stories, invested in their dreams. He stepped back from the corporate spotlight, focusing instead on meaningful work. When Emma had a crisis of confidence before a major presentation, Blake stayed up all night helping her practice, offering encouragement without trying to fix everything for her. When she wanted to expand the foundation to other cities, he connected her with resources but let her maintain complete control. They took things slowly, rebuilding trust brick by careful brick. They had dinner at quiet restaurants where they could talk for hours. They walked through the same Seattle neighborhoods where Emma had grown up, and Blake learned to see the city through her eyes. They argued sometimes, usually when Blake's privilege showed and Emma called him on it. But they learned to work through disagreements with honesty and respect. Grace slowly warmed to Blake, especially when she saw how he treated her daughter as an equal partner, someone whose opinions and feelings mattered. Tyler became one of Emma's closest friends, often mediating when Blake's good intentions outpaced his execution. The turning point came 6 months after the press conference. Emma was honored at a gala for philanthropists making a difference in education. Blake sat in the audience, watching her accept the award with pride, but without the need to share her spotlight. In her acceptance speech, Emma thanked many people: her mother, her mentors in Paris, the students who inspired her. Then she paused. "I also want to thank Blake Montgomery," she said, finding him in the crowd. "Not for his financial support, though that's been meaningful, but for showing me that people can change when they're willing to do the hard work of becoming better, for proving that second chances, when earned through consistent action and genuine growth, are worth taking." After the ceremony, as they stood on yet another Seattle balcony overlooking the city lights, Emma turned to Blake with a soft smile. "I forgive you," she said simply. "For high school, for the party, for all of it. You've shown me through 1,000 small actions that you're not that person anymore. I don't need to keep holding on to that pain." Blake felt emotion surge in his chest. "Thank you," he managed. "Emma, I love you. Not because you're beautiful or successful, though you're both. I love you because of who you are at your core. Brave, compassionate, resilient. You make me want to be better every single day." "I love you too," Emma replied, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "I love who you've become and who you're still becoming. I love that you're willing to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to keep growing." They kissed under the stars, to people who'd traveled very different paths to arrive at the same moment. The past would always be part of their story, but it no longer defines their future. "What happens now?" Blake asked when they finally pulled apart. Emma smiled, that genuine smile that still made his heart skip. "Now we keep choosing each other every day. We keep building something real. We keep growing together." "I can do that," Blake said, pulling her close. "Emma Clark, I can absolutely do that. And as they stood together overlooking the city where their story had begun so painfully and was now being rewritten with hope and healing, Blake understood something fundamental. True transformation wasn't about becoming someone completely different. It was about becoming the person you were always meant to be, especially when someone believed you could. Emma had believed in him before he believed in himself. She'd given him the gift of a second chance, not because she was naive or desperate, but because she was strong enough to risk being hurt. Again, in pursuit of something real, Blake would spend the rest of his life being worthy of that strength, that faith, that love. Some stories don't have neat endings because they're not really endings at all. They're beginnings disguised as conclusions, moments when everything that came before finally makes sense. For Blake and Emma, standing together in Seattle with their complicated past behind them and an uncertain but hopeful future ahead, this was one of those moments. The girl he'd once overlooked had become the woman he couldn't imagine living without. And the boy who'd been too blind to see what mattered had become a man worthy of her trust. It wasn't a fairy tale ending because fairy tales are simple, and their journey had been anything but. It was something better, a real ending for real people who'd done the hard work of earning their happiness.